And this is called How the 80s Were Just Better. But I'm sure that my cousin Kevin will probably agree with me here that kind of by the 90s, from my point of view, um, things were already kind of downhill. I don't know how my brother VPR 5555 will feel about it. He technically was born just in the year that is sort of Gen Y. So he is from a slightly different generation, and we don't always necessarily agree on things. For example, I think Pokemon completely ruined anime, and he and his daughter love Pokemon. So it'd be nice if he could weigh in on this one. But I think he might agree with a lot of these. Um, Still, all right. So here we go. 8 things. Number one, you could get into computing much more slowly. You usually got a computer for Christmas, like let's say a Commodore 64. So you got a Commie 64 in like 1984 or 85 or something like that, right? And you could spend a couple of years with that computer before you, say, moved up to an IBM 8088, which in some people's mind would be a step down. Um, because it's more a technical system and less a gaming system. Whereas the Commie 64, you could put Atari games in the thing and play it, which was kind of neat. But then you could spend a couple of years on the 8088, and then run a B.B.S on it and stuff like that. Then you would move up to the early 86s, the 286, a 386, a 486, right? And then on to like a Pentium 90 or something like that. That's kind of after, like, when the gigahertz started getting into, when the Pentium processors and AMD processors started getting into the hundreds, that like things started getting out of hand. And uh, eventually, as you kind of got into the 90s and early 2000s, PC publications were saying you needed to, upgrade your computer every 30 days, and we were all sitting around going like, "Oh man, what's the world come to?" You can't even have a video card for a month now before there's another one coming out. Um, but it was really nice to be able to get to learn computing, or like an aspect of computing, like a programming language, and be able to do that over some time, rather than having to soak up some new piece of tech every 14 days or something, like it is now, or just being surrounded by it all the time. You weren't necessarily surrounded by it all the time. It was a thing you could come home to and do in your spare time, and over a weekend, and maybe go to a computer club or something like that. But now, like, computing is just, like everybody's life is about computing pretty much in one way or another. Um, Number two, so the music and guitar world was a lot more analog and less digital, which means music was a lot more analog. You know, uh, I have over here a 4x12 cabinet, and an orange micro tube amp, and then over there's a solid state 100-watt Behringer head unit. Okay, and I'd say even for today, that's a lot of analog equipment. You know, but right down there, my power supply to it's dead. I have a Boss GX100 modeling unit. Okay, so all I really have to do is plug a powered speaker into that, or if I need to be quiet, a pair of headphones into that, or just plug that right into my computer via USB, and that has, dozens of amplifiers in it, dozens of distortion pedals, dozens of, and it sounds pretty good. In many ways, I like it, but despite being copied analog, everything does sound digital just a little bit. You know what I mean? And I think if you listen to music these days, you'll find that music in general has a much more digital kind of funk to it. Um, Again, that's not, it has its advantages. It's nice being able to take a floor, excuse me, take a floor unit someplace and not have to lug all this other stuff around. You can just take that modeling unit has a balanced out. You can just plug it right into the PA at the place you're playing, and since you're modeling an amp anyway, you know, there is a lot of convenience to it, but there are some trade-offs in the sound department. I will say that modeling has come a long way, and it's gotten to where most people who aren't like complete audiophiles can't really even tell anymore. But it is weird seeing a band play on stage with all just in-ear monitors and no cabinets and stuff like that. Number three, no one had a tiny little computer that they're walking around with all the time anymore. Back then, um, having this thing on your person has really changed the way that we do everything, the way that we interact with the world and each other. I'm not sure that this isn't more a detriment than it is an aid. In the 90s, a lot of us had those Nokia phones. Sending a text on them was a real bitch, and usually just made a quick call. Cell phones weren't even really around in the 80s. You had to conduct yourself a lot more differently back then, like lots of writing numbers, lots of carrying a notepad around and writing numbers down, and when eventually there were email addresses, writing email address, because there were technically email addresses before even cell phones were really a big thing. I don't think I got my first cell phone till 98, 99, something like that, and they were kind of popping up a little bit before that, but I don't think I got my cell phone until like my second year of college, right? Or I was going into my second year of tech school. Number four. People could just have a friggin' cup of coffee and converse. There was no hotspot at Starbucks back then, People were generally a lot nicer to each other. They knew how to converse and be brevetous a little better, and generally social stuff was just better back then. Like he said here, sometimes we're on the downslope of the y-axis. He thinks, and I would tend to agree with that. Even I've changed. We aren't interacting with each other the same way we used to, and I don't know that is always a good thing. I think we've forgotten a lot about communication, us older folks, us middle-aged to older folks, and I think that the older millennials, the post-Gen Y millennials and above, Gen Z, they just have no idea how to really be social and converse. Number five, social media wasn't perpetuating kind of a hatred, because hate groups use social media these days. People had to generally talk things out, or you just quit being friends. The only way things really got around in the 80s was gossip, and even up into the early 90s. Uh, I mean, think about, just to put it in terms like younger people can probably understand. Think about YouTube post 2000, pre 2007, and what an interesting medium it was. There were more videos like I do for you guys than than well, and then in 2007 they allowed people to monetize their videos, and people pretty quickly figured out that they could become millionaires, and they were trying to sell you something every 5 minutes, or keep their videos in such a consistent way that they could maintain an audience, when pre-2007 that wasn't really that important. It was more a thing people just did, or you did it to kind of do like self-therapy like I do. These YouTube videos are as much for me as they are for anybody, for the 134, 35 people that I do them for. You know, just think about even the internet before there was a Facebook on it. Before there was a MySpace on it. Forums were kind of the best that you got, and I mean, in the 80s, all we had was bulletin boards. Sometimes it took months to have an argument on a bulletin board. People kind of forgot what they were arguing about by the time they got to the next meeting. If they went to some type of computer and telecommunications society group or something like that. Number 6. If you missed a phone call, you missed a phone call. That person might never call back again, or they might call back a long, long time later. Got a little easier when cell phones were around, but in the 80s, when all you had was a landline, there was no texting. You literally had to look up a number in a phone book. When phone books got online and went digital, that got a little bit easier, because again, technically there was an internet before. I mean, that's really interesting. There was technically the internet before cell phones got really big. So, you could probably look somebody up in a digital phone book online earlier than you could, put their number into your cell phone permanently. It's an interesting thing to think about there, but communicating was a little more difficult back in the day. I'm sure there were times where somebody had been trying to call you for like months and you just never knew. Sometimes like people had like old tape and then eventually digital answering machines, which would allow you to call somebody back, but I would say the majority of people did not have those. Then caller ID came around, which was also kind of handy. I don't know if any of you remember, but back in the day, you didn't always have a phone that had caller ID built into it like you did like in the 90s and stuff. You actually had to buy a separate caller ID unit, and that caller ID unit would log the calls that came in, so at least you could kind of go back through it and see who called you. It's kind of like a rudimentary pager of sorts. You didn't have people texting you and stuff all the time. If they never called back, it probably wasn't that important in the first place, But a lot of times you had because we all used modems back then, so a lot of times you had your home phone tied up like online in the early 90s, so and you could tag that to be busy so it didn't disconnect you. But most people didn't do that, so that if they did get a call, they'd get kicked offline, they could answer their call and then log back on. You remember that? Of course, you could be missing that Publishers Clearinghouse call, I guess, which can be a bad thing. Number 7, I kind of mentioned this a little bit already. No one was trying to sell you a rock form mount every 5 minutes. Advertising was just different in the 80s. I mean, if you think about the 60s, for example, an episode of the original series of Star Trek was 52 minutes long after you cut the commercials out of it. 52 minutes. That means it's like what, 7-8 minutes? Well, it's usually 52 minutes and change. So 7-8 minutes for them to, show you some commercials, and it worked out just fine back then. These days, an hour show is 42 to 45 minutes after you cut the commercials out of it. So it's like a quarter of the episode is commercials now. I watch motorcycle. I said rock form because I watch a lot of motorcycle channel. I love motorcycles. I watch a lot of motorcycle content on YouTube, and they're always trying to sell you. Every one of these channels is trying to sell you some type of handlebar mount for their phone. Okay, almost every YouTube channel, not mine, but almost every YouTube channel out there that has a reasonable amount of customers has some sponsor for their video. You know, the idea that there are like professional content creators that are millionaires and shit, it's just absolutely mind-boggling to me. You know, no one, we simply would not have taken these people seriously back in the day, and a lot of you that are my age will probably agree with that. It's be like, this fucking guy doesn't, he needs to go out and work. I like Scotty Kilmer, but that dude doesn't need any more money. Look at what that guy's worth. He's worth, millions and millions of dollars. Okay, he's the king of clickbait. Toyota's shutting down. Yeah, all of you who know Scotty, you realize I just said a thing there. Yeah, Toyota, it's the end for Toyota. And then you go and you click on his video and watch some of it, and it's like, so Toyota's actually stopping production of the Prius in Mexico. It's like, oh, fuck you, Scotty. Like, I thought they were going to stop making a thing completely. Everybody is always trying to tell you something. I wrote down here that P.B.S, a lot of you people will probably remember this. P.B.S used to have to do, what do they call it? Telefunding, they would do a fundraiser, and they would show some interesting thing that they don't show too often, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or whatever. And they'd be like, well, yeah, we want to kind of try and get this programming, on our station. They'd never show it again, of course, but they were showing it that day, and of course people would tune in to watch it because, it's hardly ever on, right? You get to see a new thing, or like they'd be showing like Monty Python's Flying Circus, and you get to see some titties or something like that. And they had people doing like the telefunding. Sometimes Bob Ross was there, or whatever, like taking calls, and they would do auctions and stuff like that. And number 8, bands were still a thing. So I was listening to the radio the other day, and they pointed out how in the first decade, or like the first 10 weeks of 1980 or something like that, there were 146 bands that topped the charts. Okay. Then you go a decade later, you go to the first 10 weeks of 1990, and it's still 141 bands that topped the charts. Then he said in 2000 it was 60 something, and then he said, and just this year, it's three bands are topping the charts. The rest of the artists are like these at-home solo people that just do the whole album themselves. And Billie Eilish, for example, was like one of those people. And when they do tour, they just hire a bunch of studio musicians or whatever, and they go and do a tour, or they set it up so they can do most of it themselves, like, I don't know, Deadmau5 or Skrillex or something like that. Daft Punk. Although Daft Punk is an amazing group. But basically bands were still a thing. There were certainly solo artists around. The way music is done and produced has really, really changed. And I don't know if it's changed in a good way. I'm a lot more critical in my middle age of things like music and TV. I tend to be really hard on things like movies, and in fact, I almost don't watch any modern movies, really at all. A lot of the TV series I watch are from the the 60s, 70s, Twilight Zone, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Star Trek, stuff like that. A lot of the more modern stuff is just kind of meh for me these days. Anyway, thank you for watching the video to the end. If you did, I really appreciate it, guys. Give me more ideas for videos in the comments. I will certainly try and get around to producing them. Please subscribe to my channel. I am trying to grow. And have a good one. Goman Ronan signing out. Night night.